When World War I ended, Europe was exhausted. Millions were dead, cities were destroyed, and economies were shattered. Germany, the defeated nation, was blamed for the war and punished severely by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty forced Germany to give up land, limit its army, and pay massive war reparations. For many Germans, this treaty was humiliating and unfair. Their economy collapsed, inflation rose sharply, and unemployment became widespread. Ordinary people struggled to survive, and anger slowly turned into hatred toward the treaty, toward foreign powers, and toward their own weak government. This anger created the perfect conditions for dangerous ideas to grow. The rise of Adolf Hitler. In the 1920s, a man named Adolf Hitler emerged as a powerful speaker in Germany. He promised to restore German pride, rebuild the army, and undo the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler blamed Germany's problems on enemies both inside and outside the country, especially Jews and communists. By 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Soon after, he turned Germany into a dictatorship. Political opponents were arrested, freedom of speech ended, and the Nazi Party gained complete control. Hitler began rearming Germany, openly violating the treaty, but the world did little to stop him. Britain and France hoped that by avoiding conflict, peace could be maintained. This policy became known as appeasement, expansion, and aggression. Hitler's ambitions were far greater than restoring Germany. He wanted to expand German territory and create what he called living space for the German people. In 1936, German troops marched into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone. No one stopped them. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in an event known as the Anschluss. Again, there was no military response. Later that year, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. Britain and France agreed at the Munich Conference, believing this would prevent war. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared peace for our time. But peace did not last. The world moves toward war. In March 1939, Hitler broke his promises and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. It became clear that appeasement had failed. Britain and France finally warned Germany that further aggression would mean war. Meanwhile, Germany signed a shocking agreement with its enemy, the Soviet Union. The Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact promised that the two nations would not fight each other and secretly divided Eastern Europe between them. This agreement removed Hitler's fear of a two-front war, the invasion of Poland. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. Using a new and terrifying strategy called blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war, German tanks, aircraft, and troops attacked with speed and force. Polish defenses collapsed quickly. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had officially begun. Early shock and fear. Despite declaring war, Britain and France were unprepared for immediate large-scale fighting. For months, little happened on the Western Front. This period became known as the Phony War. Meanwhile, Poland was crushed. From the east, Soviet forces invaded as planned in their pact with Germany. Poland was divided, and its people suffered terribly under occupation. Across Europe, fear spread. People remembered the horrors of World War I and knew something even worse was coming. The fall of Europe begins. In April 1940, Germany struck again, invading Denmark and Norway. Soon after, in May, German forces attacked Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Once again, blitzkrieg proved devastating. French defenses collapsed faster than anyone expected. Paris fell, and France surrendered in June 1940. Europe was shocked. A powerful nation had fallen in just weeks. Only one major power now stood against Nazi Germany in Western Europe, Great Britain. Britain stands alone. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Britain refused to surrender. Hitler planned to invade Britain, but first he needed control of the skies. This led to the Battle of Britain, a massive air war between the German Luftwaffe and the British Royal Air Force. Day after day, German planes bombed British cities, airfields, and civilians. But Britain held on. Churchill's speeches inspired the nation. Never in the field of human conflict, he said, was so much owed by so many to so few. The world holds its breath. By the end of 1940, Germany controlled much of Europe. Millions were living under Nazi rule. Jews were being persecuted, imprisoned, and stripped of their rights. The foundations of the Holocaust were being laid, though the world did not yet fully understand what was coming. The United States remained neutral but watched closely. In Asia, another powerful nation, Japan, was expanding its empire, threatening peace in the Pacific. The world was now divided, armed, and afraid. The war had only just begun. By 1941, Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe. From France to Poland, from Norway to the Balkans, Hitler's flag flew over conquered lands. Millions lived under occupation, and fear ruled daily life. But Hitler was not satisfied. His next decision would change the course of history and turn a European war into a truly global one. Operation Barbarossa, turning east. On June 22, 1941, Hitler made one of the greatest and most dangerous decisions of his life. He broke the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers, supported by tanks, aircraft, and artillery, stormed across the Soviet border. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse quickly. He underestimated both the size of the country and the strength of its people. At first, the German advance was terrifyingly successful. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. Cities fell, and millions of Soviet soldiers were captured. But as the Germans pushed deeper, problems began to appear. The distances were enormous. Supplies ran low, and winter was coming. The Russian winter and Soviet resistance. By late 1941, German troops reached the outskirts of Moscow. They were exhausted, poorly clothed, and unprepared for the brutal Russian winter. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Vehicles broke down, weapons froze, and soldiers suffered frostbite. At the same time, the Soviet people fought with determination. Under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, factories were moved east, away from German bombers. Civilians worked day and night to produce tanks, guns, and ammunition. In December 1941, Soviet forces launched a powerful counterattack near Moscow. The Germans were pushed back for the first time. Hitler's dream of a quick victory in the East was shattered. Japan expands in Asia. While Europe burned, another war was growing in Asia. Japan, ruled by military leaders, wanted to build an empire across the Pacific. It had already invaded China in the 1930s, committing terrible atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. Japan needed resources, oil, rubber, and metals to continue its expansion. The United States and other Western powers opposed Japan's aggression and placed economic sanctions on it, including an oil embargo. Japan's leaders believed war was the only solution. Pearl Harbor, America enters the war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Battleships were sunk, planes were destroyed, and over 2,400 Americans were killed. The next day, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war on Japan. Within days, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. World War II was now truly global. Early Axis victories. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Japan achieved rapid victories across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and large parts of Indonesia fell. Allied forces were unprepared and overwhelmed. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles. Many believed Japan could not be stopped. In Europe, Germany continued to fight fiercely on the Eastern Front. In 1942, Hitler ordered an attack toward the south, aiming for the oil fields of the Caucasus and the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad, a turning point, begins. The Battle of Stalingrad became one of the bloodiest battles in history. Street by street, building by building, German and Soviet soldiers fought in brutal close combat. The city was reduced to rubble. By winter 1942, The German Sixth Army was surrounded. Hitler ordered them not to retreat. Cut off from supplies, freezing and starving, German soldiers suffered terribly. In February 1943, the remaining German forces surrendered. This defeat shocked the world. It was the first time a full German army had been completely destroyed. The balance of power in Europe began to shift. War at sea and in the air. Across the Atlantic, German submarines, U-boats, attacked Allied shipping, trying to cut off supplies to Britain. This battle, known as the Battle of the Atlantic, was a long and deadly struggle. Slowly, new technologies like radar, improved aircraft, and better convoy systems helped the Allies gain the advantage. In the air, both sides bombed cities. German cities suffered heavy Allied bombing, while Britain had already endured the Blitz. Civilians paid a terrible price. The Holocaust deepens. As the war continued, Nazi policies toward Jews became more horrifying. Millions were forced into ghettos, deported, and murdered in concentration and extermination camps such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. This systematic genocide became known as the Holocaust. Entire families, communities, and cultures were wiped out. It remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. The tide slowly turns. By the end of 1942 and early 1943, signs of change were visible. Germany was losing ground in the east. Japan's advance was slowing after major naval battles like Midway, where the United States destroyed several Japanese aircraft carriers. The Allies, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, were now fully united. Their industrial power, manpower, and determination began to outweigh the Axis powers. The war was far from over, but the direction was changing. The long road to victory had begun. By 1943, the war had reached a critical stage. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were no longer advancing easily. Their enemies, known as the Allies, had learned from defeat and were now preparing to strike back with full strength. The long-awaited counteroffensive was about to begin. The Allies regroup. The Allied leaders, Winston Churchill of Britain, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, understood that cooperation was essential. Though they came from different political systems and often disagreed, they shared a single goal: the total defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The United States had become the arsenal of democracy, producing enormous numbers of tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons. American factories worked day and night. Britain provided experience, intelligence, and naval power. The Soviet Union provided massive armies and an unbreakable will to fight. Together, they planned to crush the Axis from all sides. North Africa. First steps toward victory. Before attacking Western Europe, the Allies focused on North Africa. German General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, had caused serious problems for British forces. In late 1942 and early 1943, Allied troops from Britain and the United States pushed Axis forces back. After months of fighting, Germany and Italy surrendered in North Africa in May 1943. It was the first major ground victory of the Allies against Germany. The invasion of Italy. After North Africa, the Allies invaded Italy, which many called Europe's soft underbelly. In July 1943, Allied forces landed in Sicily. Heavy fighting followed, but the invasion succeeded. The Italian people were tired of war. Soon after, Italian leader Benito Mussolini was removed from power and arrested. Italy officially surrendered to the Allies. However, Germany did not give up Italy easily. German troops quickly occupied much of the country and continued fighting. The Italian campaign became long and difficult, slowing Allied progress, but tying down German forces that could not fight elsewhere. The Eastern Front. Relentless Soviet advance. While fighting continued in the West, the Soviet Union launched massive offensives in the East. After the victory at Stalingrad, the Red Army gained confidence and momentum. In July 1943, the Battle of Kursk took place, the largest tank battle in history. Germany launched one last major offensive to regain the initiative. But the Soviets were ready. After fierce fighting, German forces were defeated. From that moment on, Germany was mostly on the defensive in the east. The Red Army began pushing westward, liberating towns and cities, and driving the Germans back toward their homeland. War in the air, bombing the Reich. By 1943, Allied bombing campaigns intensified. Thousands of bombers attacked German industrial centers, railways, and oil facilities. Cities like Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin suffered heavy destruction. The goal was to break Germany's ability to wage war and weaken civilian morale. While bombing caused massive damage, it also killed many civilians, raising moral questions that still exist today. German defenses fought back fiercely, but Allied air power continued to grow stronger. The Pacific War, island by island. In the Pacific, the United States adopted a strategy called island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, U.S. forces targeted key locations, cutting off others and moving closer to Japan. Major battles took place at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. Fighting was brutal. Japanese soldiers rarely surrendered, believing surrender was dishonorable. Conditions were harsh: jungles, heat, disease, and fierce resistance. Both sides suffered heavy losses. Despite the cost, Allied forces slowly gained ground. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. The most important event of Part 3 occurred on June 6, 1944, D-Day. In one of the greatest military operations in history, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. Thousands of ships and aircraft supported the invasion. Soldiers from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations stormed 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The fighting was intense, especially at Omaha Beach, where many soldiers were killed. But by the end of the day, the Allies had secured a foothold in Europe. D-Day marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. The liberation of France. After Normandy, Allied forces pushed inland. German resistance was strong, but they could not stop the advance forever. In August 1944, Paris was liberated. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating freedom after 4 years of Nazi occupation. Across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, Allied troops continued to advance. Germany was now being attacked from both east and west. Hope rises. By late 1944, it was clear that the Axis powers were weakening. Germany was losing territory rapidly. Italy was no longer a strong Axis ally. Japan was being pushed back across the Pacific. Yet the war was not over. Germany would soon launch one final, desperate attack. Japan would continue fighting with fierce determination. The final chapters of World War II were approaching. By late 1944, Nazi Germany was under attack from all directions. Allied forces pushed in from the west, while the Soviet Red Army advanced relentlessly from the east. Cities lay in ruins, supply lines were broken, and Germany's resources were nearly exhausted. Yet Adolf Hitler refused to surrender. He believed in victory until the very end. The Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, Hitler launched a final, desperate counterattack in the west. German forces struck through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, an area the Allies believed was weakly defended. This surprise offensive became known as the Battle of the Bulge, named after the bulge it created in the Allied front lines. At first, German troops made significant gains. American units were surrounded, and the weather grounded Allied aircraft. But the German attack suffered from lack of fuel, supplies, and air support. As the weather cleared, Allied air power returned. Fierce fighting followed, and by January 1945, the Germans were pushed back. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last major offensive in the West. After this defeat, Germany had no chance of recovery. The Allied advance into Germany. With German resistance weakening, Allied forces crossed the Rhine River in March 1945. This river had long been considered Germany's natural defensive barrier. Once it was crossed, there was little to stop the Allies from moving deep into German territory. Cities such as Cologne, Frankfurt, and Hamburg fell. The destruction was immense. Roads, bridges, factories, and homes lay shattered. German civilians suffered from hunger, bombing, and displacement. At the same time, Allied troops began discovering Nazi concentration camps. Places like Buchenwald, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen revealed scenes of unimaginable horror. Thousands of emaciated prisoners, mass graves, and evidence of systematic murder shocked the world. The truth of the Holocaust was now undeniable. The Soviet push from the east. While the Western Allies advanced, the Soviet Red Army moved steadily from the east. After crushing German forces in Poland, the Soviets entered German territory in early 1945. The fighting was brutal. Years of suffering under Nazi occupation fueled anger and revenge. Cities like Königsberg and Breslau were destroyed. Millions of refugees fled westward, fearing the advancing Soviet armies. The final objective was clear: Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich. The Battle of Berlin. In April 1945, Soviet forces launched their final assault on Berlin. The city was surrounded. Artillery bombardments turned streets into ruins. Fighting was intense, with soldiers battling house to house, underground, and even inside subway tunnels. Hitler remained in his underground bunker beneath Berlin. Cut off from reality, he issued orders to armies that no longer existed. As defeat became unavoidable, his closest followers began to lose faith. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide along with his partner Eva Braun. The man who had plunged the world into war was dead. Germany surrenders. After Hitler's death, Germany's new leaders sought an end to the fighting. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies. The surrender took effect on May 8, celebrated as Victory in Europe Day V-Day. Across Europe, people poured into the streets. Bells rang, flags waved, and crowds celebrated the end of years of suffering. For Europe, the nightmare of Nazi rule was finally over. But the war was not finished. The war in the Pacific continues. While Germany had fallen, Japan continued to fight. In the Pacific, Allied forces faced fierce resistance as they moved closer to the Japanese mainland. Battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa were among the bloodiest of the war. Japanese soldiers fought to the death, and civilians were often caught in the violence. The cost of invading Japan itself was expected to be enormous, with millions of lives potentially lost. A new and terrifying weapon. As the war dragged on in the Pacific, the United States worked on a secret project, the Manhattan Project. Scientists developed a powerful new weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen: the atomic bomb. This weapon had the potential to end the war quickly, but at a terrible cost. World leaders faced an impossible decision. The world at a crossroads. By mid-1945, Europe lay in ruins. Millions were dead, cities destroyed, and entire nations traumatized. The fall of Nazi Germany marked a great victory, but it also revealed the immense human cost of war. In the Pacific, the final decision was approaching, one that would change warfare forever. The end of World War II was near, but the final chapter would be the most dramatic of all. By the summer of 1945, World War II had already claimed tens of millions of lives. Nazi Germany was defeated, but the war in the Pacific continued with terrifying intensity. Japan showed no sign of surrender, and every battle came at an enormous human cost. The final decision to end the war would change the world forever. The cost of the Pacific War. As Allied forces moved closer to Japan, they faced extreme resistance. Battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa revealed how deadly an invasion of Japan would be. Japanese soldiers fought almost to the last man, and many civilians died rather than surrender. American military planners feared that an invasion of the Japanese mainland could kill millions, both soldiers and civilians. The war had already lasted 6 long years, and the world was desperate for an end. The atomic bomb decision. The United States had developed a new weapon through the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. President Harry S. Truman, who took office after Roosevelt's death, faced a historic choice: continue the war with a massive invasion or use this new weapon to force Japan to surrender. The decision was deeply controversial. Supporters believed it would end the war quickly and save lives in the long run. Critics argued that it caused unimaginable destruction and civilian suffering. Truman chose to use the bomb. Hiroshima. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. In seconds, the city was devastated. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. Buildings were flattened, fires raged, and survivors suffered severe burns and radiation sickness. The world had entered the nuclear age. Japan still did not surrender. Nagasaki. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Once again, destruction was massive. Combined, the two bombings killed over 200,000 people, most of them civilians. On the same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-controlled territories in Asia. This double shock pushed Japan to the brink. Japan surrenders. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed the Japanese people by radio. For the first time in history, citizens heard their emperor's voice. He announced that Japan would surrender. On September 2, 1945, the formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was over. The human cost. The war had been the deadliest conflict in human history. More than 70 million people died, soldiers and civilians alike. Entire cities were destroyed. Families were torn apart. Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The Holocaust had murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others. Genocide, mass bombing, and starvation left scars that would never fully heal. A new world order. After the war, the world changed rapidly. The United Nations was created to prevent future global conflicts. War crime trials were held at Nuremberg, where Nazi leaders were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. Germany was divided. Japan was occupied and rebuilt. Old empires weakened, and new superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. Soon, tensions between these two allies would lead to a new conflict known as the Cold War. Lessons of World War II. World War II showed both the worst and best of humanity. It revealed how hatred, racism, and unchecked power could lead to destruction. But it also showed courage, sacrifice, and unity in the face of darkness. The memory of the war remains a warning to future generations. Peace must be protected, and history must never be forgotten. Never again. World War II officially ended in 1945, but its lessons still shape our world today. Borders, politics, and international laws were forever changed. Museums, memorials, and survivor stories remind us of the price of war. The greatest conflict in history finally came to an end, but its shadow remains.